Okay. We are live with two of my favorite colleagues and collaborators, sort of a dream team here. And I just want to say hello to everybody who's joining us. We're going to give everyone a few minutes just to get started. So we'll kind of chit chat, let you sign in. And as you do start to sign in, I want to make sure that everyone feels free to use the chat function really fluidly throughout this webinar. We certainly have some details we want to give and some advice and some tips, and we want to make sure that we're answering whatever question you have that you want answered by the end, if we can. So it's great to see everybody, and I'm just going to say a quick hello in the chat to get us started. And I'm asking you folks, like, where you're from. Are you a parent, a teen? Are you I'm assuming, I hope if you're a teen, this is a live school event. Are you a counselor? If you're a parent of a teen, is it a young teen, sort of a tween age? Is it older? Just want to get a sense for it. So that way, if we can, we'll try to adjust to the audience that we have. All right. So, but we'll go ahead and we will get started. So, hi, Autumn. Are closed captions available? Someone's asking about closed captions. And you know what? I'm going to get started and I'm going to figure that out as we get going. I'll wait for my wonderful colleagues to introduce themselves. And while they're doing that, I'm going to figure out if we can create closed captions. So that's a great question, and we will certainly try. So we are talking today about anxious to awesome. It's a big, it's a big leap. And really what we're thinking through is how to guide your teen through social challenges. We hear a lot from parents. We hear a lot from school counselors that there are certain times in a teen's life where these questions come up for them, for the parents as well. For instance, going to a new school, transitioning from elementary to middle, et cetera. So we thought this might be helpful for a wide range of folks. So I have with me today our illustrious, here, let me just get my pointer going. Our illustrious, there we go. There you are. Panel. We have Dr. Colleen Lang, Dr. Liz Seidler, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Colleen, you want to go first?
Hi. Sure, just because my face is before yours. Hi, I am Colleen. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I am the director and founder of a group, private practice in Manhattan and Brooklyn, where we specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavior therapy. The bulk of my graduate and postdoctoral training was in skills-based approaches with adolescents, and prior to private practice, I worked in a high school setting and also then did some consulting to schools in how to use these approaches. And then finally, I am also the parent of two boys, one of whom woke up the other day a preteen. So I'm getting some personal experience with this.
All right.
Ditto. All right, you, Liz?
Okay, so I'm Dr. Liz Seidler. I'm a clinical psychologist. I own a private practice in Fairfield County in Connecticut. My practice is primarily preteen to young adult. I also specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavior therapy. I've done a lot over my career. I would say the other current thing that I'm doing besides therapy is I co-host a podcast with Sarah, who is on here as well, which is for college students with the goal to disseminate some evidence-based techniques and tools to handle that transition successfully. And I've done a lot of research on adolescents, vulnerability factors for psychological problems, a lot of school consultation on implementing CBT and DBT in schools. I'm happy to see, I'm seeing in the chat a little bit that there are some school personnel. And I am anxiously awaiting the preteen teen years of my three children, but I'm about to get to double digits, and I hear it's a fast sail to
Yeah.
the teen years once we get there. So I'm
yeah.
really excited to be here. So thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you guys. And sorry, there's some occasionally some wonky formatting on this. So apologies for that. Sometimes when we switch to the share screen here, it doesn't always love our Canva. So hopefully that won't get in the way too much. But we want to just give a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. So we'll start with what is normal. And a lot of the things that people come into my office or that we hear about, they'll be really stressed out about something that, yes, is stressful, but also quite normal and typical for certain age ranges and situations. So we want to share that with you. And then we also, once we review that, we'll talk about skills that can help. We'll go through a few concrete skills. And then at the end, we'll think about how to navigate setbacks. And during that conversation, we'll also talk about the parent's role, or sometimes not the parent's role in navigating that and how you make those choices. So that's just a quick overview. But luckily, Colleen and Liz know that I'm going to give them not really a pop quiz, a true false, All right, you girls ready?
Yeah.
All right. So what is normal, true or false? Teens should have many friends. Many.
False.
False. And why would you say that's false?
I would say it's false because teens all have different temperaments with respect to whether or not they may be more extroverted versus introverted, and what their interests are in terms of having fewer very close friends versus being a part of a bigger group where the friendships aren't always as intensely close.
Yep. All right. The first answer, you got it right. Oh, good for you.
I feel good.
All teens should have an interest in socializing pretty much nonstop.
I would say that's false.
Oh, why, Liz? Why is that false?
I think that this is like a socialized concept that teenagers really, that's like their primary goal is socialization. And I always say, in the same way my social life has seasons, teenagers have seasons too in terms of their social life. And sometimes it's a bigger priority for them and sometimes it's not.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that it's healthy to take some breaks. Right. All right. Ooh, going the wrong way. Quiet or shy teens will be neglected or rejected by their peers. I'll take this one. I would say that this is false. In fact, many people find that their more quiet friends are wonderful listeners. They tend to go to them when they might need a little bit of a break from sort of the group discussion. And oftentimes quiet or shy teens, when we talked about the temperament issue, feel very comfortable with a smaller group of friends, and they feel completely within their like I said, their comfort zone. And so I would say that this one is false. Now, sometimes people can be neglected or rejected, but that can come from many different reasons, not just because your teen is quiet or shy. All right. You should be worried if your teen has friendship changes throughout middle and high school. It's true or false? Colleen.
I would say that's false.
Correct.
You want me to say why? I need the validation first.
Yes.
That is false because, there's a survival-based need for social approval and inclusion. And this is the developmental task of the moment. While our teens don't have fully developed brains, but have rapidly intensifying emotions. So this predicts that this task is very difficult and in a state of constant flux, that teenage values and interests are going to ebb and flow and change. And so we can expect not just change, but a lot of change.
Yes. And I will admit that I'm going through this right now with the middle schooler where I said, the only thing to kind of feel like it's normal is just all sorts of up and down and not normal. And one day it's this and one day it's that. I'm just like, get ready, buddy. I'm on the roller coaster with you. And so it's totally common. Not to say it's easy, but it is common. And it's not something to necessarily worry about. Okay, if your teen isn't popular, they'll feel unhappy.
I would say that's false. I think a lot of times, again, there's this judgment or sometimes even projection that popularity equals happiness. There are a lot of kids that would prefer not to be on a lot of people's radar or even interacting with maybe some of the popular kids. So yeah, I think that's just, I think again, there are like these societal kind of norms or biases that people have that usually is when the statement, a parent or a child even might believe this to be true.
Right. Okay.
I would also say that it isn't necessarily the case that just because your teen is popular, happiness and self-esteem are guaranteed.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It's complicated. And I almost think I've noticed, given all the phrases like Riz and cringe and all that kind of stuff, and I'm sure I'm even delayed in which ones are the most popular ones to date, the word popular has changed meaning.
Yeah.
It's not always considered what people are striving for. It's a label just like jock, but it seems like people see it as, okay, that's a group.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Your teen's friends should be quote unquote good friends across the board. And I will say this is false. Obviously, I think you guys realize this is kind of a rigged quiz. Everything is false. The reason I wanted to make sure we talked about this is I found that even adults, young adults, teens of all ages have this sense that if someone is a good friend, they're a good friend across all categories and across time and emotional moods in all settings. And no one can be that friend. I'm not that friend to everyone else. And no one can be a friend 100% of the time across the board in every category. I'm not always great at texting back, but I will fly to see you if you need me. So people have to tolerate that part of my personality doesn't always fit with their need for consistency in texting back. Liz, I mean, I don't know. Sorry, Liz. And so I think it's something to remember, because a lot of times I find that kids or parents have high expectations and not a lot of grace for some miscommunication and friendships. And I think it's more beneficial maybe and effective to say, where is this person fitting your needs as a friend? Where are they not fitting your needs as a friend? And do you have another friend who can kind of fit that need? But it's more like having sort of a conglomeration of people who can fill various spaces for you. So,
and also I would say like the capacity to learn how to address those issues when they come up, because that's a skill in and of itself.
100% to navigate through it and decide, is this a healthy friendship? Because sometimes it's not, and you need to pay attention to that. But you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is, I'm told, a phrase for only old people. But I still use it because
it's
all right.
good.
So we have a question. So is it typical for a teen girl to burst into tears regularly over small things? For instance, her younger brother teasing her favorite dessert, not being there, etc. How much is one supposed to dig into what is actually bothering her? I think, well, there's a range of typical, and I will try to answer this question without sounding too much like a psychologist by saying, well, it depends, because I know people hate that. I would say it can be typical because teenage years are a time of great mood swings. So Colleen, you mentioned earlier that it's a time of rapid intellectual and cognitive growth in a way, but the emotional growth, when I wish I had a little, drawing. It's like, here is cognitive and emotional development, and they kind of go along together for a while. And then adolescence happens and the cognition goes up and the emotional development stays, lower. And then it isn't until more young adult years, college and beyond, where it comes back together and the emotional maturity matches the cognitive maturity. So it can be typical for people to have emotional reactions to things that don't necessarily feel logical, because their logic and their emotion are so distant from each other. That said, I wouldn't automatically assume just, it's typical, because there could be something to say, hey, what are the ways in which you can feel more regulated with your emotions? Are there things and skills? Because there are certainly tips for how to get emotions more on track. There are so many different hormones and social situations going on that this could be a sign too of someone, I'll see someone holding it together at school all day and they come home and they're just like, everything's a mess, because it can be. So there's a lot of different reasons for that. And I think just trying to monitor it and to see, is she like that across school and home? Are there times where she can feel a little more relaxed? Maybe on the weekends, is it as hard? I would just pay attention, kind of monitor, start to keep almost like a little journal, like, when is this happening? What's going on, to see, is it correlated with anything? Anyone else? All right. Thank you for your question. We're going to go, and I'm just going to at some point scroll through and see if I missed any other questions as the chat was going. But skills that can help. All right, let's get to the nitty gritty. Now, this is not this is not exhaustive. This is kind of a smorgasbord of some that I think we'll hear a lot. But here are some common social worries that come up. And I think that one of the main things that can come with social worry is what these all have in common is an over prediction that people are watching you and judging you and waiting for you to fail. And yes, teens can be a little, yes, they can be judgy at times. Yes, there can be times where there's some mean comments here and there. Everyone's kind of out for survival, like, right? It's like that need is there. And for the most part, most people are really trying to navigate their own inner world. I don't know if you guys had any additions to this when you were looking through. Do you feel like I missed a couple, or ones that you felt like, oh, I hear it all the time?
I usually
They hate me.
Yeah, they hate me. I'm boring. Like something about their likability, like their social currency, like some aspect, whether they're attractive, they're not interesting, I'm not funny enough. People dislike,
And also just like broadly framing all of them a heightened sense of everybody is looking at me, noticing me, attending to, and thinking about me. That sort of like spotlight effect, which is maybe partly responsible for the overprediction.
Right. And it is a time of real self-focus, and I'm sure as parents, you've had times, if you're working with teens or you have a teen where you're just like, wow, they are really not paying attention to the perspective of other people. I mean, it is a time for us people it is normal to be a bit self-centered in this time. The flip side of that is that you overpredict how much people are centered around you. And this can actually be a good thing when it comes to social worries, to remind them, hey, listen, everyone else is also having the spotlight effect on them. So you've got your spotlight that you think is happening, but they've got theirs, and your light paths aren't crossing right now. There's some comfort in that, I think.
I would just add also, it's not necessarily another specific thought, but maybe partly because teens don't have a prefrontal cortex quite yet. They also tend to have a hard time understanding that all of these moments, both painful and joyful, are not going to last forever. So teenagers having a little bit of a harder time attaching to like close friendships, and these moments have to last forever and can't change, versus like this moment of distress and embarrassment or shame, this also is going to last and follow me forever. Like forgetting that these things will shift and pass.
Right. Okay. And I think there's a couple of slides too where we can come back to that in a few different ways, because I couldn't agree more. And I do think it really highlights the need to just, when we talk later about perspective coaching, it's because they are limited right now in terms of their abilities to gain some of that perspective. Okay. Oh, good. I need someone to help with pointers. I'm always trying to find my mouse. All right. Ways you can respond when you hear this. If I'm a therapist and I'm working with someone, I'm sure, Colleen, Liz, we've had these kinds of conversations all day long, and we're probably going through some sort of skill with them that we've taught them, and we're asking them to really break it down. I don't know that teens always want their parents to do that. So we wanted to share with you some ways that you could respond in the moment without suddenly sounding like a therapist. I don't know. My kids will say to me sometimes like, nope, turn off therapist. And then, oh, right. Sorry. Yes, I'm listening. So I've had to figure out ways, okay, how am I paying attention to what's happening that I know is happening, I know isn't helpful without sounding lectury, because, we all know the lecturing is the first way to make the kids just eyes glaze over. So one is model. I try to do this more. I try to have more of these things that I'm saying outright, as opposed to whenever they say something where I think, oh, there's a mind reading, cognitive distortion there. I will try to say, okay, when are times where I'm having one and how do I work my way through it? And it just normalizes it. So that's one thing. I don't know if you guys ever model with, even in session
so many
too,
opportunities.
Yeah.
So many opportunities come up for modeling my own social worries and how I get through them.
I know a lot of, it seems like some people work in schools. I think this is like a really good opportunity when you're with a student. There's so many times that patients I work with are not paying attention to me. So, and I do have the actual worry, right? Like that they think I'm boring, I'm a lousy therapist, when really it's just like a dog that's like walking by in the background that they're paying attention to, or an alert like on their phone they forgot to silence. So I think it's a good opportunity to kind of observe and share. Like, here's an example of a time that I'm jumping to a conclusion about how you feel about me or think this is going. And they can see like, oh, I'm susceptible to this too, right? It might not, I have other skills, which we'll talk about to use, but I think it helps them kind of see like, this is like a really normal process, right? And rather than focusing maybe on changing the way that your child or the student is thinking, you're kind of modeling, this happens for me too. It's a really normal experience about, making assumptions about what people think or how they feel about you.
Yeah, it's like a subtle opening of the door to talk about it if or when they're ready, but it also, kind of helps them see they're not alone. The next one is just to remind, and we'll go through these relatively quickly, but the next one is to remind them of times where they had something similar and that they got through it. Now, this can venture into lectury, but it's just nice sometimes to say, hey, let me just kind of pull out, zoom out a little bit for you and to say, you were worried about this before and it was okay. And knowing teens, they might be like, you're stupid. They might be like, whatever, you don't know anything. Okay. But just it's a gentle nudge and you never know what's sinking in and what isn't. They're probably not going to be like, you know what, that is amazing. Thank you. They're not going to do that. But it's it's also a skill. When we think about thought challenging questions, that is a question we will say. We'll say, what has happened in the past? We ask them to reflect on that and to say, okay, is there anything you can use from that where you were panicked, but it felt, you overly anticipated, but it worked out okay. Or it happened, but you were able to cope. The other thing is to externalize the anxiety. Now, this can sound a little strange sometimes. I put an example in, but I could really use your help in the ways that you have modeled this idea so that people can get a sense of it. But instead of trying to fix or solve the problem, help them see that this is an emotion that isn't necessarily part of their path forever, that it's not factual necessarily. So it's just saying something along the lines of, your anxiety is really loud right now. Wow, I can really tell that you're kind of making your body rev up. Do you guys have other ways you've done this?
I might do something like say, well, it sounds like you're really, really focused on only that one interpretation or assumption of what that person was feeling. Or it sounds like you really kind of want to go with that one and assume that one is true without considering other ones, just to sort of as a way of also highlighting like that thought's not necessarily a fact.
Yeah. Right. That thought. Right. So in that way, you can externalize the emotion like, oh, your anxiety is so loud, or you can externalize the thought like, oh, you have this sort of thought. And like, here's another option.
Right.
And you can also externalize an urge. right? Like,
Yeah.
wow, sounds like I'm having a hard time moving you away from wanting to send that text.
Right.
With thoughts, I really like, I do this a lot. I do voice memos all the time. Like I make a lot of my patients with these social worry thoughts, kind of like record their worry, and then we just like listen to it in session. And I do think that helps externalize things a little bit to create some space for them to consider, okay, there might be a different way that I'm viewing this.
Yeah. Sometimes with little kids and in official therapies, you might say, okay, let's externalize and make, kind of a character for your OCD or your anxiety and so on and so forth. And I will say, even with an adult one time who was having some intrusive thoughts, not necessarily social thoughts, but it was around like, am I balding? And I said, he decided to have that thought come up, and Cartman from South Park, which I will not mock, but or try to do, but it's a hilarious voice, and literally he's like, well, that's all I needed, So it's just ways to sort of be like, oh yeah, okay, there's this thought, there's this emotion, there's this urge, okay, we can notice them, and next. Yeah. Validate instead of trying to problem solve. We talk about this a lot in our webinar, so we don't need to go into too much detail, but it's always worth putting in there that when someone comes to you, or a teen especially comes to you with a social concern, the chances that they think you can solve the problem are low because you don't understand what they're going through, or you actually don't understand what they're going through. So I think just saying, I can see you're really upset. Have you seen parents do this really well, or opposite? Have you had people come in, or your own children respond when you haven't been validating enough? What happens?
I think communication decreases and emotions rise. I mean, even with my own kids, it's the listening is more important than any words that you're going to say.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about it. It's just this urge, even as a therapist, my urge to fix things, as a parent to fix things, that nothing good comes from getting overly involved in problem solving, particularly when you don't have a lot of good solutions. You don't have a lot of control over the situation.
All right. I'm asking the audience, any response you've had success with. So feel free to share, because it's not like the three of us are the only ones who've, had to think about these things. Last but not least, I think sharing a memory. I remember growing up and my mom talking about her getting teased on a bus when she was in 7th grade. And I was like, what? Teasing existed in the 50s, So I think sharing a memory of a time where, yes, I remember I did something like this happen to me and it felt horrible. So it just, again, helps them feel less alone. Okay. So, Colleen, you were talking about the spotlight effect. You're going to see the extent of my graphic skills here, but we think about perspective, and this is the teen's view of what's going on. It's just them. It's just now, not much else. Maybe a few things in the peripheral, but that's about it. Versus what we think of, right, is their view, and where perspective coaching can come in, is to sort of help them or coach them to see past, present, and future, as well as the fact that all these other little timelines that people are going through, that's happening as well, so that there are different perspectives. So Colleen, I know this is something you had already mentioned, so feel free. I know you talked about kind of maximal impact with a parent and how to think about or help them gain that executive functioning or to kind of coach them in that area if they don't have it naturally themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like bringing a teenager back to a previous moment where they were in, really high distress and they made their way through, or they were treated a certain way and now they're friends again, just to kind of enhance that perspective of how it's likely that, this too shall pass, as things have in the past. In terms of, I find it, I don't know if this is about brain development or not, but I find it more helpful than trying to remind them of like this moment is just this moment and like there's a future, right? Because maybe their brains just aren't developed that way. I do think it's helpful to capitalize on their preoccupation or focus on like other people and other kids, And so I do often find it helpful to coach kids to consider, like, if you feel this way, then can you imagine maybe others feel this way and or have felt this way? And that seems to be a little bit more of the that can give perspective outside of just themselves aspect of this, like, spotlight effect.
Right.
And also sometimes even just like normalizing. This is a part of being a teenager, that you do have more intense emotions, and you have more intense emotions that you can't always control, that come up usually in friendships, and you feel like you're the only one. And like, how crazy is that you feel like you're the only one, but I'm telling you that it's a part of adolescence. So it means everybody else is feeling the same thing.
Right. Right. Someone said to me once, like, gosh, I don't love music the same way as when I was a teen. It's because you have such an intensity of experience in that time. So there's pros and cons, right? It's such an exciting and fun and emotional time. And, it also means that there's more, can be some more bumps. And so this is just a quick way to say, as a parent, what you're trying to do is to sort of help them say, all right, what is your anxiety telling you? Or what is your social concern telling you? And then allowing your discussion to say, okay, is there a way to see, what are some potential ways that this could work in your favor, or that you could see yourself managing it? All right. So we're going to shift a little bit to more of a conversation about social balance, because if you think about social skills, which are really complicated and not necessarily hard to teach, one of the things we do try to think through when we're working with teens is this idea of social balance. This is true for both the teen, right? I'm going to get in there and I'm going to please everyone. I'm going to carry their books, front to and from class, make sure they like me, or I'm not even going to try. What's the point, right? Same thing for parents, and we'll talk about this in a little bit later on. Just remember this graphic, is that sometimes parents can have a sense of over and under what, trying to navigate what they do. So when we think about social balance, some ways we thought that we could share easy, concrete ideas is to consider discussions with your teen about the friendship frame, which we'll go into, and letting them know about the benefits of social signaling, right? So the friendship frame is for those kiddos who might be trying too hard and accepting too many problem behaviors. Social signaling is going to be helpful for the kiddos who might be giving up too soon, or sort of quiet as a mouse, not smiling because then people might notice. So let's talk first about the friendship frame. All right. So, and I've talked so much. I'm happy to sit back and let you guys share more. The thought here really, though, is to have, really a good idea about what is considered an okay, healthy friendship and what are considered no-goes. A little different from where we were talking before, like, hey, everyone has a bad day. If your friend was short with you or didn't text you back, I don't know that doesn't mean they're a bad friend. They might be having a bad day. But this is, I've found teens people don't always know what their list is. And they're kind of hitting limits in the moment that they didn't know they had.
I feel like they're so, the tendency may be, by the way, I would just back up to say that actually these two tendencies to either sort of like overwork versus feign indifference as a way of like protecting oneself can happen in the same kid also. Sometimes kids can kind of, seesaw between them. But in terms of knowing the friendship frame, this also helps with another kind of perspective, a little bit of a perspective thing. It's just like kids who are so concerned about whether or not they're going to be included or liked often are not focused enough on what it is that they should be looking for or could be looking for or like are entitled to. And so this can help to help them better understand what they should be sort of like going for.
Yeah, I was going to say this reminds me so much of a middle school girl that I'm working with that I think finally has found this out in 8th grade. It's taken a while. But she decided, and this was on her own, but I think it's great. She started like keeping track of like every time she hung out with this group of friends, she would just rate her mood afterwards, like how she felt. And she basically saw that like every time she hung out with these friends, they made her feel not great about herself, right? And she's like, and I wasn't even happy, right? I'm so attached to spending time with them. And so just recently I saw her the other day, and it's just like, I started doing that with this like new group of friends that are less popular, let's say. And she's like, and my ratings are higher every time I talk to them at school and after, and then like thinking about what qualities. I'm like, so what's the difference? Like, what's happening? And she's just like, they ask me questions. They don't do gentle teasing. They are kind to other people, right? They give me compliments. Like, and she's like, I was friends with people for 2 years that had never given me a single compliment, right? So I think the goal is just increasing awareness in terms of like, how do I feel with these friendships, and do they have the qualities of a friend that are important to me?
Right.
And also that awareness, like I also have a choice. I have a choice about where I invest my time and energy, which sometimes it doesn't feel that way.
Right. And I found that this is a longer road in conversation. It's more of a sort of a shaping, consistently coming back, having conversations, hearing people out, asking, okay, well, what does that friendship make you feel like? What do you feel like it's reciprocal? Just trying to navigate that, because, friendship frames can be very different for different people. Some people are a bit more willing to take a little extra sarcasm. They're comfortable with it. Other people feel like, I'm more sensitive. I actually don't like it. I'm going to try to find people. I'm going to seek out people who feel more gentle. Some people really having similar interests is hugely important. I can imagine if you're a student athlete and most of your time is spent on a field, then that would feel like, oh, I really need someone who understands that. But for other people, it might be small. So I do think that this is a time where you as a parent or counselor or whatever your role is can share and impart, like, hey, in our family, we think it's important for people to be respectful of you, or I think you're worth having a gentle ear when this is happening, or listen, I know you really like that friend. And they seem like they're really great when you need like a laugh or to go out, or they kind of always know, where the people are going to be. That's great. Okay. So know that, but then maybe you have another friend who is a better, more reciprocal listener. But I do think this is a conversation that unfolds over time.
I was just going to say quickly too, that I think editing friendships is really scary for kids. And I think normalizing and getting willingness to kind of see like, this is really normal, right? That just because you've had sunken costs, you've known them since pre-K, and you've been in this little group that you've like hung out with forever, that adding and subtracting from your friend group is really normal and something we do across our lifespan. And so I think challenging any of the worries that they might have about it ends up being okay. Right.
Yeah. Right. No, exactly. There is something to be said about not just putting one foot in front of the other when it comes to friends, but it does take a lot of bravery. All right. Going now to some social signaling. So for the ones who might say, and again, Colleen, you're right. I mean, it can happen in one day. Both can be true for these kids, that they are trying everything they can and hitting boundaries in friendships, and then they decide to give up too quickly. I do think that a lot of times people forget how important it is to have appropriate body language and some signaling, like, here's an invitation that I am open. How many times have people who are quiet, have you been confused? Oh, I thought that they didn't like me, right? Or I'll meet with people who really do feel like they don't want anyone to look, and their face says, do not look. And so it's overkill of that particular coping strategy, because then they're like, well, no one's talking to me. I'm like, well, yeah, you might be showing them that you are not open to the idea. So social signaling 101 is just some gentle tips to help the teens in your life explain, like, this is important. This is evolutionary, much of it, and pretty meat and potato stuff that if you try it, it doesn't guarantee an outcome. But if you don't try it, you're pretty much guaranteed to not get a lot of invitations, because it's not a time where teens are risking their sense of self to come find you and pull you out of your shell. Okay. So social signaling 101. We'll go through this again relatively quickly, but open body language. So, I think like
Gentleness.
like the half smile, right? Mirroring other people's expressions. Active curiosity. So any takers?
Yeah, I think for this one is that kids hate small talk. I mean, I don't like small talk, let's be honest, right? Like nobody really likes it, right? And there are certain windows of like small windows of time to socialize, let's say within a school day. But I really think sometimes, again, this self-focus that can happen in pre-adolescence and adolescence, that we need to be mindful that we're actually talking about things that other people are potentially interested in. I've seen this a lot where kids will try to initiate a conversation about something they're really interested in, but it's not a common shared interest per se, right? So you really want to make sure if you're going to shoot a dart, right, that you're shooting in the right direction in terms of either recalling like a shared experience you've had before in the past, or, oh yeah, you were in that class with me last year, like you like robotics, right? Like, are you doing anything with that this year or something like that? And asking questions. Kids, like this is when we are very egocentric at this time in our life, right? So although we don't want the spotlight to be on us, we care the most about ourselves during this period of time in our life.
And so this is a way of like turning it around, right? From ourselves to the other person. But I also think like active curiosity, the back and forth, the positive reinforcement, this is all playing on the idea that we like and are disarmed by people who seem to like us.
Yes.
Right. So this is like these are the skills for like increasing your own likability and sort of greasing the wheels of social interactions.
We
also like the people who compliment us. I mean,
somebody
complimented my outfit on the train the other day, and I felt very close to that person afterwards as a result.
Right. Your new best friend.
This works.
No, it's so true. We all light up, so it's like you using these things. But, I think no one necessarily loves small talk. Some people are better at it, than others, but it is kind of a necessary evil and it doesn't have to be so hard. All right. Also, now listen, let's just state this for the record. I've never talked to a teen about this and had them go, "Oh my God, really? Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh." Okay. So I just want to be realistic. That said, I think that sometimes one of the difficulties is helping them see that it just needs to be boop, in and out. It doesn't have to be anything intense. It can just be like a sprinkle of a question. That's it. Now, if I went in, and I might have done this, I went into ChatGPT and I said, because I'm testing out what this new fangled AI is. And I said, what are some conversation starters? And this is why I don't think ChatGPT is going to take over the world, because it was hysterical. It was like, what are your favorite hobbies? Okay. But some sense though of, hey, what are you up to this weekend? What's going on? Teens oftentimes are going to be listening to music. Music is so important. Shows and what you connect to, like what's in the cultural zeitgeist right now. I'm not a millennial, but I talk to them, people who are like one quick generation below me, and they'll be like, they love Gilmore Girls and Hocus Pocus, and there's Hocus Pocus shirts everywhere. Suddenly I'm like, what was the deal with this movie? And it's because that was what people were watching who are now buying t-shirts at H&M. They were the ones who loved Hocus Pocus when they were 12. Or I was like, I don't get it. My point is, this is a time where there's so many fun, curious interests. And then the things that are going on around you and what's part of your adolescence is only going to be yours. So you're going to have an automatic bond with people because you're growing up in the same culture. Right? Even more so now, kind of globally, because Everything's on social media, for better and for worse.
I also think this can be like highlighted by, I mean, I don't know if it would be super effective to just like, you know, cold turkey approach someone and be like, what's your favorite song? You know, like I think it is a little smoother if maybe you're coaching your teams to go off like, you know, if they're wearing a certain jersey, or you could see what they're playing on their phone, or they have certain stickers on their backpacks, to like sort of go off of that in terms of the cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say like also making a commitment to doing it. Yes. None of this is rocket science, but I think it's like if your child or a student is really aware that they like this person, there's just a vibe they kind of get from him. It's like, okay, like what's your game plan? Right? Because anxiety tends to get in the way of like limiting our access to this drop down menu. But if I knew like, oh my goodness, I love this girl's style, right? And I'm like, okay, like by Friday, I'm going to compliment her on like a shirt or something that she's wearing. You're more likely going to fall through with it if you've made a commitment. Like, what conversation starter am I going to try to implement, and where am I going to direct that conversation?
Right.
I like that, Liz, because I feel like that's also not necessarily included here in a conversation starter. Like, I feel like when teens ask me the question of like, well, how do I approach this person? I get nervous where I'm like, oh, that's so hard to come up with it, you know, and I often go for like the shared interests, like, oh, you're in tennis with this person, like ask about their experience with that coach, or, but I also think it could be helpful to have as a conversation starter a compliment, right? Yes. Because we just talked about how powerful those can be.
Yeah.
And the truth is, if you want to be friends with someone, it's worth asking the teen anyway, well, why? What is like pulling you to the person? And it might be their style. So like, you know, it's probably worth the risk to be like, I love that outfit, or I love your style.
And nobody, again, I mean, some kids are like, that's so weird. But I give this example all the time to my patients. Like, my best friend since I was 9 is because she was wearing a Roxy jacket, like surf company. And I thought it was so cool. Like, I wrote my diary on like, this girl's so cool, blah, blah. And then I was a nervous, shy kid. And I told her one day how cool her jacket was. And she had a lot of pride in this jacket and was really happy that someone was noticing her style. And I'm still friends with her. So I do think compliments, like, as much as it makes kids nervous, it feels really good, right? I don't think anyone that's on this call can say that it doesn't feel good.
No, absolutely not. I also think the other thing that can bond people is a shared annoyance with teachers, parents, experiences, right? And so I put that in there as well. This idea of like, you know, most, they joke about it with certain things. It's like, okay, trauma bonding, when you go into a situation and everyone has the same teacher that they hate, or who's really, really hard. You remember who's in that class. It's sort of, that is a shared experience that everyone can relate to. So feel free. I'm always saying to my kids, like, throw me under the bus, you know, like, use me. My mom, it's so annoying. I'm happy to do it. So I saw the one thing to say about conversation starters is it's less about like what is said, because to Colleen, to your point, it matters so much. Like, the reason they're drawn to them and their social level of interaction with them, how much, you know, if you go up to somebody randomly in the street and say, hey, that's different than somebody who's in your class and you sit next to them. So there's a lot of different factors to consider. But I do think that conversation starters are often the gap between the friends you have, or kind of that naturally you're fine with, and the friends you want. And so if you have friends that you want and you're not there yet, I don't know how many other ways you can get there besides starting a conversation. Yeah. So, all right, let's move on to the next round of true or false. All right. So I won't make you guys do this. I'm like, because I think we all know that the answers are going to be false. So let's just go through and we'll talk more about kind of some of these myths maybe that teens have, even if we don't, you know, as grown-ups, we've gone through certain things. We kind of know them not to be true, but they're going through this in real time. So, you know, this idea, if it's impossible to recover from social gaffes, would you say that that's true? I would say that it's not true. If your teen makes a mistake, go ahead and change schools. Like start the application process now. If you need to monitor like crazy to make sure your teen doesn't make any social mistakes. I would say that this is not true. And we'll talk more about that in the next section. Teens are mean and ruthless. This one I might say is yes, and kind and sensitive. All right.
I'm guessing also that like this myth of teens being mean and ruthless relates to why we might hold myths about the impact of mistakes that our other teens may make. Right. When the reality is, mistakes are absolutely inevitable, definitely going to happen. We've all made them. And though teens are mean and ruthless sometimes, there are strategies and ways to move forward and learn and grow.
Right. Right. Nothing has to be forever. And there are always ways to recover. You need to get in there and fix it for them.
Maybe most often you shouldn't.
Yeah. Right. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think that some of the things that kind of myth was talking about is the normalization of setbacks during this time. And the sense that if your teen feels like they're in crisis, it can be hard for parents not to fret and worry with them, And so part of this is us just saying, take our word for it. There are extremes. There are extremes. For the vast majority of teens and situations, it is something that is going to ultimately be the way that they have to gain wisdom over time. Okay. It's the same way that we build our immune system. We have to build our social immune system. You don't do it by living in a bacteria antiseptic, socially antiseptic world. You have to be having access to some social viruses per se to build up your social immune system. Do you guys kind of know, or, do you know? I know you know, but thinking about kind of overly instructive versus uninvolved. Remember we said, pay attention to this, that parents have to kind of dabble with this as well. I'd be curious to hear from the audience, although I know people might be feeling a little less chatty right now, but I'd be curious to hear some of the reasons why, if you have them, there might be some urge to be overly instructive or urge to be uninvolved, right? Because we want to verify that I have, as a parent, gone back and forth on the spectrum. Yeah.
I have found that being overly instructive can, rob our teens of opportunity for learning their own ways of negotiating, and being uninvolved may run the risk of not expressing how we care. But I find as a parent and as a teen, we talk about this concept of attachment, and that where I might become either of these is because I feel attached to a certain outcome or attached to avoiding a certain outcome. So I loved when Sarah said before that this is sort of like a parallel to that quandary for teens where they might be overworking versus showing too much aloofness. And that is often also because they might be overly attached to a certain outcome. Usually the outcome of, I don't want to be rejected. I can't be rejected. And for parents, it may be something like that, right? Where we're so attached to not wanting our kid to be rejected that we try to either over control it, or we become maybe a little bit more avoidant on the other side because we're too scared of screwing it up. And either way, it can be helpful as an intervention for teens and parents to engage them in, well, let's just imagine the worst fear scenario. Let's imagine this thing that you're scared of happening that you're kind of trying to prevent through being on one of the other of these extremes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that idea. Follow the path with them. Don't act like it's the worst thing in the world. All right. If you get rejected, then okay.
How do you cope?
Well, how will we cope? Yeah. Go ahead, Liz. I cut you off.
I was just going to say, when Colleen was saying about the attachment, I think it's also helpful to realize that a lot of this is coming from anxiety, both from parents or teens, and that acting from your own anxiety as a parent usually does not end up in the result that you want. And same thing with your child, right? We want to get to a regulated state that we kind of think about. what can I do to get a desired outcome? And if I don't end up getting that desired outcome, like, how can I convince myself, which is true, that I'm going to be okay? And that concept, I think, is hard for parents to sit on their hands, but we want kids to develop self-efficacy. We really want them to feel capable that when they encounter a stressful social situation or they get socially rejected, that they know what to do. And they feel confident their parents are not going to, 5-alarm fire, call the school, remove them from school, or their parents are going to be so afraid of how their child's feeling that they're going to be silent and maybe not even offer support, right?
Right. All right.
I would just add quickly that I think like the idea, this is where like the idea of having like maximal influence while we accept that we don't have control, right? Like when I'm teaching teens in the therapy room or even talking to my preteen boy, I'm basically saying like, we can make these suggestions. It's not going to guarantee that you get what you want, and it'll increase the chance for sure. It might even maximize it. As parents too, we have to always think about that. Like, where can we have maximal influence while we're accepting the limit on what we can control?
Right. I was just trying to make sure that people got the link to the YouTube channel. Some people had asked if this is going to be recorded. We always record our webinars, send them out to the registrants, and will then be in our YouTube channel posted later for the whole world to see. So, I think that all the things you're saying is that really this idea of being the study consultant, which means, to your point, a consultant isn't tied to an outcome.
Right.
You're not a dictator. You're not a manager. You're sort of like, okay, here's some thoughts I have, and the steadiness, right? So even if you are freaking out inside, I've definitely had times where my son or my daughter is telling me something and I'm like, oh, I'm like starting to pant internally. And then, but hopefully what they see is, some smooth sails, because it's natural, to your point, to be attached to their well-being. And in order to have long-term well-being with friends, they often have to have short-term difficulty. And if you save them from everything, you're actually causing more disturbance in the long run. But that can be so hard to set on your hands. So hard. All right. So I know that a lot of people by the end might have some questions that they have. We want to open it up to people asking, what are the things that we didn't cover that you want to hear? So pop that in the chat. We're going to be here for a few more minutes. If we don't get any questions, we'll just assume that we literally covered everything, and from soup to nuts, you got everything you needed. So I will make sure I'm paying attention to the chat as well, but we would definitely love for everyone to give us feedback. So if you have the chance to grab that QR code, it'll send you to the quickest little survey about what was helpful, other topics you might want us to have in the future. We're always looking to improve. And then we will have another webinar coming up. So stay tuned, join our email list if you're not already on it. For October 24th, we talk about sleep, teens and sleep, and how it helps them manage mood. Just one question we have from Isa. I've heard before that you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. Would you say it is true or false in your experience? All right, we had 90 seconds to answer that question, ladies.
It sounds like a very specific statistic. I would just quickly say, I do think that we're probably influenced by, of course, the people that we hang out with, particularly if we're emulating them in terms of like sharing values. And I think that it's probably more important to focus on how we feel about ourselves and about how we're living as a result of who we're with.
Yeah. I think that go ahead, Liz. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, social contagion is a real thing. And sometimes that's really helpful, right? I know for me, my friends that want to exercise more, I exercise more because they're exercising, right? So I think that it's true, but I think sometimes parents can get very concerned about who those 5 people are. And I think that there's more malleability in a healthy way that can be there. And there are certain aspects of a child that are personality traits that are stable, that might be really positive, that these 5 friends don't have, or something like that. That who we surround ourselves with might just because that's the environment we're in currently. doesn't have to say anything about them internally.
Right. I do think that, like most things, we'd say, well, it's a little more complicated than that. One of those great psychologist answers, but well, I cannot thank you girls enough. We will end here, and we appreciate it. We hope you guys will see, the audience. You've been wonderful with your questions and responses and input, and we will see you at the next one. All right.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Lesbi.
Bye.
Bye, Colleen.